Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to finish our puppet and finalize it for delivery. We're going to create a T-pose for our guides, adjust the control shapes, and set our default values. Let's get started. Now that we have our guide setup complete, we can start finalizing our puppet. What I've done between videos is finish the skin paint and add another free control module above the legs to function as a hip controller for extra flexibility. Feel free to load this workshop from the included workshop archive to take a closer look. Before we move on to adjusting our control shapes, we need to tackle one last subject, the puppet's default pose. As I mentioned before, one of the great strengths of having the joint structure and deformations present before the puppet construction is the ability to pose the joints before the puppet is built. Often, we're faced with a dilemma regarding the pose of the model. Since the A pose is the best for deformation, but very uncomfortable to animate, since the controls are not aligned with the world axis, which makes it a pain to animate. Also, more often than not, model components aren't lined up correctly. In this case, for example, the arm geometry forced me to place the arm guides in a skewed fashion, since the elbow position wasn't aligned with the shoulder and wrist plane, in turn skewing my IK solve. Usually, we would probably solve this issue by sending this back to fix in modeling, which is far from ideal. But no longer. Since our deformation is kept at all times, Block allows us to pose the guides, solving all of these issues internally without needing to compromise anything. Let's take a look at this process. I'm going to deconstruct so I can set my T-pose for my guides. Since the spine and neck are aligned nicely, we're going to set a T-pose only for the limbs. I'm going to start with storing the bind pose before I make any changes. I'm going to select my root guide, open the guide posing section, make sure bind option is selected, and press save. This step is very important. We always want to store our bind pose, just like we do when dealing with joint hierarchy. Now that I have a bind pose stored, I can start posing my guides. Of course, guide posing needs to take place after deformation was set. I'm going to start with the arms. I want to align my arm with the world positive x-axis, as well as straighten my arm plane to make sure my IK solves correctly. I'm going to create a temp locator to help me with the alignment. I'm going to match the shoulder orientation to start. Now I'm going to find the nearest world alignment to clean up the orientation. I'm going to match the shoulder guide's orientation to my helper lock. Now that the arm is aligned, I'm going to clean up my elbow and wrist translations to make sure I have a perfect IK solve plane. Then I'm going to make sure I have some angle on my elbow to allow my IK solver to find the up vector correctly, and realign my wrist orientation to the world positive x-axis. I could go further and straighten the palm and fingers, but I don't think that's necessary at this stage. Our left arm is all set. Let's move on to the legs. We're going to roughly repeat the same process for the legs to align the foot and knee with the positive z-axis. Great, our left limbs are posed. It is a great spot to visually compare the right and left limbs to notice how major this change is for animation. Before we save our T-pose, we need to symmetrize the limbs, of course, so we will use the brand symmetry method again. Now that our T-pose is complete, we can save it by moving to the T-pose option under the guide posing section and pressing save again. Let's compare our bind and T-poses to make sure they are stored correctly. Awesome, we're all set. Let's reconstruct. Now our puppet is much cleaner and much easier to animate, since all of our controls are aligned with world axes. Also note that we achieved all this without creating any extra offset transforms on our controls to keep everything nice and clean. If ever I need to adjust my T-pose, I can always deconstruct, make adjustments, and resave. Once again, block rigs are dynamic, and everything can always be adjusted since the rig has two states. Now that our puppet is posed, I can finally adjust my control shapes. Let's customize the control shapes to make them easy to access, then we will see how to extract them. I'm going to build the control shapes for the center and left components only, since block contains an easy method to symmetrize the shapes. We will take a look at that in a few moments. This is a good spot to explain more about block's control grouping. To keep the puppet clean and easy to use, block splits all controls in the construction stage to three groups: primaries, secondaries, and tertiaries. To control the visibility states, you can select the main control and change the visibility attribute for each module. You can also use the picker and the module visibility tool, which are included in the toolset. So as you build your control shapes, make sure to adjust the secondary and tertiary shapes as well to deliver the cleanest possible rig. Now that we have our control shapes customized, all we need to do is open the control shape section in Block, symmetrize them in one click, and extract them in another click. The control shapes will be stored under the CS subgroup for future construction. You can always access these manually if needed, or use the simple tools in Block to manipulate them. That looks much better. We're almost done. The next thing we are going to do is set default values for our controls, since we want to deliver our puppet with the best default values possible. Now, of course, it is very inefficient and bound to human error to do this every time we construct. We could write a simple chunk of code in Python and execute it in post-construction, but again, that's inefficient and very annoying, to be honest. Once again, Block contains utilities that will allow you to store your default values once you set them, to make sure they are restored once you construct. Again, keeping all of your data within the scene. So let's go over our controls and adjust the default values. For this specific puppet, it will mostly be space values adjustments. For example, the default space value for our leg IK handle is the leg root, so we want to change that to the local control. Also, as we covered in the previous video, we want the default value for our arm FK orient space to be the COG. Now that our default values are set, we can simply save them under the Control Default Values section in Block. Let's do a final construction iteration to make sure all of our control shapes and default values are being restored as expected. Great, everything is restored correctly and our puppet is nice and clean. The last subject we are going to cover is the picker. I'm going to create another more extensive video about picker creation in the future, but I want to give you a quick overview regardless. Picker creation in general is considered a very tedious task that many riggers would try and avoid if possible. Because of that, I tried to create the easiest and fastest method I could think of to create a picker. The general process is this. Every block rig contains a projection camera that will be used to project our 3D positions to a 2D plane representation of the picker dimensions. I'll view the projection camera in the viewport, and now the camera gate represents my picker dimensions. I'll open the picker layout editor, and I can start projecting my controls to create another block entity, a PLO. PLO stands for Picker Layout Guide. The PLO controls will be used to map buttons in the picker window as well as set how they behave. Once a PLO is positioned, I can load my picker and inspect the result. The picker will now contain a picker button for every created PLO and use its settings to set the button's behavior. Block will also allow you to plug in background images to use in the picker window for ease of use. I'll do a few just to show you how easy it is, but I'll go on to complete it after the video and include the result in the workshop archive for you to be able to take a closer look. Block contains many easy-to-use utilities to edit the picker layout guides, from alignment to symmetry to text font and color. Another important note about the picker is that it will be saved with your template, so you don't have to create it from scratch if you started with the previous rig. For example, if I'll deconstruct the puppet to obtain the guide template and reposition my guides on a different character, my picker will be set up already, and all I have to do is change the background image in my rig settings and my picker will be complete. And that's it, we're all done. Easy, right? I'm going to make another short video to conclude the entire series. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd appreciate your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next video.